I'm just going to say welcome, everybody. I wasn't able to be with you last week. I'm so excited I can study with Rabbi Singer again today. Um, Wonderful feedback, Suzanne, from last week's
Oh,
class,
thank you.
and
Thank you.
really grateful to have you with us and part of our educating community. And I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. So, hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Um, does anybody have any lingering questions from last week or anything they really feel they want to share so far?
Yes, will it be aired again? I'm so sorry I missed it.
It's recorded.
Oh,
And
okay.
maybe, Marcia, maybe you want to put in the chat the link or something?
Yes. So let me do that. I will put the link to all of our classes, Irene, are recorded and they go on the JCook YouTube channel. And we're also going to be adding Suzanne's the slide deck that she used, so you'll be able to follow along on your own also. And so
Yeah, I made PDFs of all my slides and they will be attached there. And if you want them before they get attached, in the chat, maybe you can put your email address and I'll just send it to you directly. You can just go, the easiest thing is Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. If you put that in Google, you'll get their website and then it says adult education or education, and then it says archives.
But I'll put the link in the chat right now, friends, so don't worry.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. I just want to make one comment about this thing that I did not even attend, which is for some women, they believe that their sexuality is the only power they have.
Okay, I hope that you will find some arguments against that in this class. Okay. All right, great. Thanks. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind muting yourself until you're ready to talk. Hi, Cynthia. Can you mute yourself too? Because
Sure.
yeah. Otherwise, there are these extraneous sounds that come through. Okay, so let's just start from what Irene just said. When you think of women in the Bible, generally, then you're going to have to unmute yourselves. What kind of adjectives come to mind?
Silent.
Violent.
Manipulate.
No, silent.
Oh, silent. Okay, silent. Okay, silent, manipulative. Anything else?
Turning point.
I'm sorry?
Right.
Turning point.
Turning point? What does that mean?
Well, there always is when something with a woman, especially in relationship to a man, somehow she changes him. That
Oh,
there's an important change that takes place that she sees that maybe he doesn't see.
okay. That's an
And all
interesting
these
idea.
different encounters that meant, yeah.
Someone else was saying something. Was it Sandra?
I said they were brave because they were standing up to norms that have been in place for years and tried to change them.
Great. That is the case with some of them, definitely.
Beautiful. Quite often Sarah, we know that Sarah was beautiful. Rebecca, definitely.
Mhm.
Esther.
Not so much Leia.
Right, not so much Leia, right?
Okay.
Right.
Well, not to him, not to him.
Right, right. But I think Susan said manipulative. Was that you, Susan? No, Megan? Somebody said manipulative. All right. I heard the word come through. Oh, it was Cynthia. Okay.
I didn't say that. I was going to say guile. There was guile, and they're thought of as being a seductress or, maybe manipulative. But I think the women were smart, and they were underrated in a lot of ways in the way that they were written up. But
The way they were remembered, I would say, because we'll see that they're not as silent and as sort of manipulated, but the manipulative issue is that a lot of times if people don't have actual power, they end up having to be kind of underhanded in the way they do things. For example, Sarah hears the annunciation by God that they're going to have children, but she has to hear it through the opening at the tent, like she's listening in, because she's not being directly addressed in that case, right? So a lot of times, if you're not the person in charge, you got to find other ways of getting things to go your way. So today, I want to look at some women that are actually very, very different from what I think the stereotype is, which is women warriors. So let me share my screen. So we're going to look at women warriors, Devorah, Yael, and Judith. Let's just take a look a little bit. Let me just raise this up here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So Devorah is in the book of Judges. Can I get someone to read? We have a few slides here of the text. Who would like to read?
Now Devorah, a woman and a prophet, the wife of Lapidot, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under Devorah's palm in the hills of Ephraim, and the people of Israel would come to her for judgment.
Okay, so she is a woman, a prophet, and a judge. So far, we have that much, right? Now, what does it mean to be a judge? Let me just stop for one moment and explain that this is in the very beginning of the history of Israel. Before it was a united kingdom at one point, then it split into two kingdoms. But before that, basically it was a confederation of tribes, right? We have 12 tribes, and they would get together in case of an emergency. For example, when the Philistines, who lived in what is now Gaza, would attack, anytime they were attacked and they needed to get together and create some sort of an army, then 2 or 3 or more tribes would get together to do that. And a judge was really somebody who led the tribe. They also did judging the way we understand judging, but it was more than that. It was really, the head of the tribe and sort of the one in charge. Okay, so this is telling us that Devorah was one of those judges, interestingly enough. Okay, let's continue. If you wouldn't mind reading the next bit.
She sent for Barak and said to him, Adonai has given you this order. Go, march to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men. I will cause Sisera, the commander of Yavin's army, to encounter you at the Kishon River with his chariots and troops, and I will hand him over to you.
Okay, so here, what sort of role is she playing here?
General.
Yeah, exactly. So she's also the general. Okay, if you won't mind continuing.
Barak answered her, If you go with me, I'll go. But if you won't go with me, I won't go. She replied, Yes, I will gladly go with you, but the way you are doing it will bring you no glory, because Adonai will hand Sisera over to a woman. Then Devorah set out and went to Barak to Kadesh. So Sisera rallied his chariots, all 900 iron chariots, and all the troops he had with him.
Okay, thank you. So do you notice anything odd here about the relationship between Barak, who is some sort of head of the army, and Devorah, who's really the general?
That she's in a position of power, and yet she also lends weakness to the image.
Aha, whose image?
His.
Right. Well, also notice that he says, I will go only if you go, right? He's not ready to just go do what she tells him to do. He sort of needs her as support, whether it's moral or otherwise. And then, yes, she kind of says, yeah, you'll have some victory, but it won't be really because of you. It's going to be because of some woman. So that's kind of interesting.
I think
Okay.
it's more than that, Suzanne. Also,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say that it is, and I'd love to hear what other people think also. But the book of, as I understand the book of Judges from my Bible studies, like every judge is aberrant in some way.
Yeah, we're getting to that.
Whether they're left-handed or
yeah, we're getting to that.
Right, or they're not like totally cognitive, and the fact that she's the only one of all the judges that is so self-aware, that she says, I mean, I know the story. She's actually totally with it, and she knows that it'll completely demean him if she's recognized it all part of his victory. I think that's really interesting that none of the other judges sort of have that self-reflective capacity except the female. Has anybody ever here ever studied Deborah like in detail in this way? Rhea, did you ever do that with
Yeah, yes, with wait a second, where's Susan?
With Raina?
No, it was somebody, my brain. But also she also wrote a book about the Book of Judges, and from her she gave us a perspective
Nancy
that
Myers.
the Book of Judges also it was a devolution of morality, of peoplehood, that it and so it was not yay yay yay, but oh my goodness, things are falling apart, and that this is part of, and I don't know if the idea that she takes over and diminishes who would normally be the hero of a battle, if that's part of that going, all I can say is devolution, not an
Actually,
evolution.
okay, you're right about the devolution, which is so like the Book of Judges is set up really so that after that a king is needed, right? It's set up that way to say
Yes.
over and over again, everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and because there was no king. And then, of course, in the next book,
Yeah, they do terrible things.
yes,
Awful
but
things.
this is Devorah is at the beginning. She's
Uh-huh.
not okay. So this is before that devolution. We do see things deteriorating morally in the book. We really don't have time to go through that, but
No.
but that is the shape of the book. Okay, so let's just let me make sure I do this. Yeah, okay. Let's go on. If you don't mind continuing.
Deborah said to Barak, "Get going. This is the day when Adonai will hand Sisera over to you. Adonai has gone out ahead of you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with his 10,000 men following him, and Adonai threw Sisera, all his chariots, and his entire army into a panic before Barak's sword, so that Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army. Sisera's entire army was put to the sword. Not one man was left. However, Sisera ran on foot to the tent of Yael.
So here again, see this, she has to sort of push him to go do his job, right? Get going, man. Come on, we've got this war to fight.
Could I
And
ask, what is that in Hebrew? Is it like Lech Lecha?
oh God, I have to look it up. Let me pull out my Bible right here and take a look and see what it says. Judge 4:14. That would be interesting if it was Lech Lecha, but I don't think it is. So, by the way, Judges. So the Torah is 5 books of Moses, and then you get to the Nevi'im, the prophets, and this is the second book in the book of the prophets. Okay, what is it? 14. Let's see what it says. Well, I'm looking at 5. That would make it difficult. Okay, 4:14.
No, it's 4:4.
No, that 4 is the 4th slide. It's the little
Okay.
tiny 14. The little 14 is the verse number. Okay, let's see. And Devorah said to Barak, okay, let's see, 14. Vatomer Devorah el Barak. Kum is like get up. Get off your tuchus, basically. That's what she's saying to him. Hizeh hayom asher natan Adonai et ya. So this is the day. This is the day we're going to have this victory over Sisera. So now you have Sisera, who's the general, and he seems to somehow have survived this horrible attack. Notice they have chariots. Usually the other side, has advantages over the technology of those in Israel. And somehow they're able to overcome this army, except for Sisera, who's now running to the tent of Yael. So Yael, okay, she is actually a Kenite, Kenite. She's a Kenite, and the Kenites are basically allies of Israel. She's not, an Israelite, but she's as close as you can come to one. Okay, would you mind continuing?
Yael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord, stay here with me, and don't be afraid." So he went into her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink. I'm thirsty." She opened a goatskin of milk, gave him some to drink, and covered him up again. He said to her, "Stand at the entrance to the tent, and if anyone asks you if somebody is here, say no."
Thank you. All right. So what is the scene that's being set up here? How is she portrayed? What is she doing here that you could characterize?
She's being hospitable and
Okay.
kind.
She's being hospitable and kind, absolutely. What else could you say? What is she giving him to drink?
She's giving him milk, and he asked for water.
Okay. So what does milk represent?
It's like maternal.
Exactly. It's maternal. So, here's this guy, he's running away, da da da. Oh, please come in. The whole idea of opening your tent the way Abraham would open his tent to people, right? Hospitable, let me give you something to drink, let me cover you with a blanket. I always joke with my husband about in movies, the parent comes into the bedroom of their child and they put the blanket over them. That's always a gesture that seems to, indicate parental concern. So he's now feeling very cozy, I'm sure, right? So let's see what happens. One more slide.
But when he was deeply asleep, Yael, the wife of Hever, took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand, crept into him quietly, and drove the tent peg into his temple, right through to the ground, so that he died without waking up. So here is Barak pursuing Sisera, and Yael steps out to meet him and says, "Come, I will show you the man you are looking for." He goes into her tent, and there is Sisera lying dead with the tent peg through his temple.
Now, that's maybe a little shocking, do you think? I mean, she's been hospitable, she's covered him with a blanket, she's given him milk. Isn't that lovely? And the next thing you know, he's got a tent peg rammed into his head. Not
Maybe
quite.
the reason she gave him milk instead of water is that milk makes you sleepy.
Okay. Very good. So instead of putting a little dose of sleeping powder or something in there, good. So this is not what you'd normally expect of a woman in the Bible, I don't think, right? I mean, it's not that she's like killing him in self-defense. It's not like, even let's say maybe, I don't know, knife him to, but I mean, a tent peg in the temple, that's rough. So any other comments? No? Okay, so we're going to look at Debbie Friedman, who wrote a song about Devorah. Does anybody know the song? Okay, well, you'll learn about it then. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So here are the words of the song. Arise, arise, Devorah, arise, arise, etc. We're going to go next to look at the song that she writes about this whole episode, which is one of the oldest pieces of poetry in the Bible. Devorah the prophet was a judge in Israel. She sat beneath her palm tree, and people came from everywhere just to hear her judgments, honest and fair. Devorah the prophet, Devorah, a mother in Israel. Okay, for some reason, these hanging things are in the way. Let's say, okay. Devorah the prophet was courageous, strong, and wise. Her people lived in peace for 40 years. The 12 tribes lived together as one for the first time since the world had begun. That's kind of fanciful, but okay, we'll take it. For the first time since the world began. Okay. Arise, arise, Devorah. All right, so we're going to just listen to a little bit of her song about this.
Let's face it, most of the insurance industry can feel a bit prehistoric, impersonal, and confusing. Arise, arise.
that's okay. So again, I want to take a look at all the roles that Devorah plays. And I brought the text back here. So she was a prophet. She was a wife of Lapidot. Remember that. She judged because she was under the palm tree and people would come to her for judgment. We're going to see that she's also a poet. But let's first look at the background about this book of Judges. So it's in the two chapters 4 and 5. And again, as I mentioned before, there was a confederacy of tribes at that time. And they weren't all united as one, as she sings, which, as I said, is kind of an ideal that is not completely true. But, depending on what needed to be done, sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 tribes, sometimes it'd be more. And by the way, you see over here, Philistia, this is where the Philistines were. Oops, did not mean to do that. This is where Gaza is now. So Gaza was actually never part of biblical Israel, just a little side note. And the reason this whole territory was ended up being called Palestine is based on the fact that there were the Philistines here. And it was a way for the Romans to basically completely erase the, heritage of the Israelites. Because calling it Palestine was a way to say there's no Judah, there's no, Israel. Anyway, so I mentioned that we're at the very beginning of the book of Judges, and this is before public institutions and structures had yet been created. And so there was a little bit more of an egalitarian situation. So let's look at a couple of people. Carol Myers, for example. She says the absence in early Israel of developed hierarchies in political and economic spheres. In other words, we didn't have a king or a president or whatever, and different levels of political and economic power. So she posits that because of that, there were more non-hierarchical gender relationships. In other words, you could have a woman judge. Again, the judge was also the head of the tribe. Cross-cultural analogies suggest that both males and females worked very hard and contributed nearly equally to the demands of establishing arable plots of land and eking out a living from them in the rocky, seasonably arid hillsides of the Palestinian highlands. Okay, what does that mean? In those days, there was no real division between your workplace and your home, right? You had an agricultural life. You had, sheep and goats, and you grew things on your land, and that's how you survived economically. You made your clothing at home. I mean, everything was done in this one arena, and women and men worked together. And then if the men had to go to war, the women had to pursue all these economic pursuits on their own without the men. So it was not as hierarchical as it became later. Plus, again, the institutions of the community were not yet established. So it was possible for things to be different from what they would normally be, or normally under more developed societies. So she said it's quite plausible for a woman to be involved in military affairs because there were localized and sporadic defense problems during this period. And it was a very much of an ad hoc system of military defense. There was no standing army. That was one of the things that kept being repeated about why we needed a king, because we needed to have an army. We needed to have a centralized system that would work better. And so women contributed to the defense effort. And in pioneer societies, women in the military realm were, in fact, part of, what society needed. So things are not yet being formed. We're just talking about a very, very, very beginning of this community. Now, this is what Rabbi Marsha was saying before. So at that time, because of the very early stages of the society being formed, you had what you would referred to in those days as social misfits or outcasts. For example, you had a left-handed man, and you probably know that up until fairly recently, left-handedness was considered to be a problem. And they would force kids in schools, for example, to use their right hand, even, in recent American history. So a left-handed man being a judge, the head of a tribe, would be unusual. Gideon is the son of a concubine, and he doesn't seem to believe that God is actually on his side. Abimelech kills 70 of his kin in order to reign. And Jephthah, which we're going to look at Jephthah's daughter, he ends up sacrificing his own daughter to gain military victory. And in Judges 9, which we're not going to get to, there's a suggestion that there were no honorable people during this period willing or able to serve as political leaders. So you had all these non-traditional people able to lead a tribe. So a woman, now, does a woman mean another misfit? Let's see. She thinks that Mika Ball, who's another scholar, believes that actually Devorah, in contrast to all these male rulers who were, unusual people who didn't normally, fit the norms of later on, that she was actually an outstanding ruler. She was an ideal judge, a leader, an animator of the people. She's not referred to as a gibor, which means mighty or strong. Gibor is a male thing, which, according to Mika Ball, requires no wisdom, but only violence, no insight, only bodily strength, no poetry, only cutting words. Now, we've had a lot of arguments in the last couple of years about whether violence and war is the answer, or whether there's some other more diplomatic way of resolving issues. And I think what she's suggesting here, and I don't necessarily buy this completely, because, to say women are this and men are that, I think is really not fair. But she's suggesting that Devorah or Deborah represents a very different model of leadership, and of leadership in the military particularly, that it's not necessarily about violence. On the other hand, hey, the whole story ends pretty violently. I don't know how many male warriors took tent pegs and rammed them into somebody's brain. Now, the rabbinical view, this is kind of interesting. So remember, it says she was the wife of Lapidot. Well, the word Lapidot means torch. So you could say she was the wife of Mr. Torch, or a woman of torches. And then they say, well, actually, her husband made the wicks for the tabernacle, for the temple, right? Which didn't exist yet, but there was a movable temple called the tabernacle. And because her husband made the wicks, she was the one who lit the torches in the temple, which really is a way to pretty much diminish her, right? That she's just the wife of this guy. She's not actually, the judge and the warrior and all that. But she was upright. That's a good thing. With prophetic ability, that's good. There are women in the Bible who have prophetic ability. For example, Moses' sister Miriam. And Torah scholars even came to learn from her. And why is that? Because she was the one who prepared the wicks for the tabernacle. And she encouraged her fellow Israelites to regularly attend the synagogue and tabernacle. So it's not that she was a warrior. They're trying to sort of, smooth the edges here a bit. She wasn't a warrior. She was a woman who tended to what had to be tended to in the temple. They even sometimes say that, that Barak was her husband, that how could it be that the woman, and this is rabbis many hundreds of years later, right? I mean, the Torah and the Bible are canonized in the year 100. So these stories predate the year 100. The rabbis come a couple hundred years after that. And so they're going, couldn't be that this is a general. It must be that, she's actually just this woman who works in the temple, and the real warrior is Barak. And here the real military deliverance is affected by Barak. In other words, yes, maybe she called him and told him to get moving and to move his butt, but he's really the one. He's the military commander. She, wasn't the one who was behind all that. And as I said, sometimes they, and this happens a lot, by the way, that there are two different names for somebody, and somehow they end up being the same person. For example, there's a story about, let me stop for one sec. Hagar, for example, who is Abraham's concubine, whatever, mother of Ishmael. She is sent out into the wilderness because Sarah's nervous about her and about her son. And she's left out there to die, so is her son. But somehow they redeem the whole thing by the fact that later on they say that Abraham married her, even though there's a completely different name of a woman that he marries named Keturah, but they somehow connect it. So the fact that somebody has two different names doesn't bother them at all if they want to decide they're just the same person. So any reactions so far to the rabbi's view, to Devorah? Any questions?
You said you were talking about left-handed leaders. It's interesting. Almost all the presidents since Reagan have been left-handed.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
Well, it has, really, I think in the 50s they still were forcing people to write with their right hand.
Right.
I
think Trump is one of those who writes right, but he's actually a lefty.
Oh, really?
Yeah, almost the majority of our presidents have all been left-handed.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just real quickly, one of the things I thought, because the judges was how did you, wasn't like you kind of like just rose to the top of a judgeship. It wasn't really any political steps to take.
I don't think so. See, the word judge is, it is the right translation of the word. Shoftim as judges, shofet as judge. It's the correct translation, but it didn't mean the same thing as we mean by judge.
Okay. So my other thing is, did she have, Deborah herself, did she have greater insight to God? And his, I always thought the reason why she tells him to go to war is God will be with you. That this is, and that he also wanted her to go to make sure that God was with them.
I think the implication is that, given the fact that she's considered to be a prophet, that she has a direct line to God. But see, a judge in those days is really the chief of the tribe, is really tribal chief is probably a better way to translate. Even though, as I said, literally shofet is a judge, no question about that. But it's not the same kind of judge.
The fact that she was made a chieftain, really at that time,
What about it?
Just the fact that she was made a chieftain.
Yes, exactly.
It's really interesting.
The fact that a bastard, a left-handed person, somebody who killed a lot of people, somebody who sacrificed their daughters, all these really, really, not to say that King David didn't have his flaws, but all these flawed characters are able to rise to that level because the norms haven't yet been set. Irene, did you have a question?
Yeah, how does somebody get to be a prophet?
God decides. It depends on how you want to understand it. Do you think of any modern day people as prophets, by the way?
No.
You don't? Okay, I do. But I don't, for example, Leonard Cohen or Elie Wiesel or people like that. To me, they're people who are so sensitive and so tuned into what is going on in the world that they somehow are able to give you insights that you otherwise wouldn't have. That's my understanding of a modern day prophet. So
Okay.
in the Bible, if you're a prophet, it's because God's decided to speak to you directly. So, for example, Isaiah. Let's think about Isaiah. Isaiah is a prophet. There's a whole big fat book devoted to him in this section called the prophets. And by the way, the Judges is in the section called the prophets. There are a few prophets in there, but it's more historical material in the first part of the book of the prophets. You know, TaNaKh, Nevi'im is prophets in the middle. So when Isaiah is some guy who all of a sudden God appears to him and says, "You are now going to prophesy." And Isaiah says, "No, I can't. My lips, my whatever, you know." And most prophets are reluctant prophets, because what do they have to do? They have to go out there and tell people you are sinning, you are going to be punished. Who wants that kind of job, right? They get jailed, they get beaten, you know, whatever. So I think the understanding of the Bible is that it's chosen by God. But, you know, if you don't want to look at it that directly, as I said, you can think of it as somebody who's particularly sensitized to the world. Yes, please, Sylvia.
On the other hand, you asked, hi Sheila, you asked how did the rabbis treat Devorah in this text? And they, what you're saying about prophets and this and that, what they did was they made her a womanly woman. Isn't that nice? Just bringing her back down to where she belonged, her place in the world.
I think so. I think there's a little bit of that going on. Definitely. I mean, they don't question the purity of her motives or anything, or her talents or anything else, but yeah, she's not the general. It's Barak. And maybe it's her husband, Barak. And she was just somebody who lit the candles and made sure people came to synagogue.
Well, yeah, and this is the traditional things that women do. We light the Shabbat candles. We teach. We're allowed to learn Torah so that we can teach them to our kids who are under 5, or to the girls who can teach them to their kids. But that's as far as they went.
Right. So let's take a look at her poem, because now she's going to go into a little more detail about Yael. Okay, share. Here we go. Oh, I forgot this slide. Devorah would be under her palm tree teaching Torah in public, because a woman would not normally be alone with men within her house. Okay, I forgot that slide. She the reason she was outside under a palm tree is because out of the humility of, you know, and care to not be, you know, in a home with a man. She was very obviously cognizant of that need to be seen as a woman who would not be alone with a man in a house. Okay.
Not even a husband?
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah,
Not
with her
even...
husband, sure. But, you know, she was judging. If she was out there judging, you know, and teaching people Torah, she couldn't do it in her house with men. Right? Yeah, that's it. Okay. So let's look at Yael, who here's a beautiful illustration of the tent peg going into his head. Does somebody want to read a couple of these? This is her real song in the Bible. Anybody else want to read?
How about Jim? You want to read?
Jim, you've been volunteered.
Okay, thank you. Yael will be blessed more than all women. The wife of Heber the Kenite will be blessed more than any woman in the tent. He was asked for water, and she gave him milk. In an elegant bowl, she brought him curds. Then she took a tent peg in her left hand and a workman's hammer in her right. With the hammer, she struck Sisera, pierced his skull. Yes, she shattered and crushed his temple. He sank down at her feet. He fell and lay there. He sank at her feet. He fell. Where he sank down, there he fell dead.
If you don't mind.
Oh, Sisera's mother looked out the window. Peering out through the lattice, she wonders, Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why are his horses so slow to return? The wisest of her ladies answered her, and she repeats it to herself. Of course, they're collecting and dividing the spoils. A girl, 2 girls for every warrior. For Sisera's booty of dyed clothing, a plunder of colorful embroidered garments, 2 embroidered scarves for every soldier's neck.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So again, we see a woman behaving in a way that you don't really usually expect. Certainly not from biblical women. I want to compare the prose version and the poetic version. So here's the prose version. Yael went out to meet Sisera. Come in, she says. She covers him with a blanket. She gives him milk. He says, stand guard, make sure that nobody's coming to do anything to me. And then she takes a tent peg and she just, puts it into his head. And then she tells Barak, hey, there's the guy you're looking for in my tent. And then here is the more poetic version. He asked for water, she gave him milk, and an elegant bowl, she brought him curds. Then she took a tent peg in her left hand and a workman's hammer in her right. With the hammer, she struck Sisera, pierced his skull. Yes, she shattered and crushed his temple. He sank down at her feet. He fell and lay there. He sank at her feet. He fell. Where he sank down, there he fell dead. What do you notice in terms of differences between the two versions?
The second one is better storytelling.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. Why is it better?
It has more detail, more color.
Mm-hmm.
It's poetic.
It's poetic, definitely. So what does that mean? It's poetic.
It's go ahead, Sheila. Go ahead, Sheila.
I was talking with my hands. I was saying there's just more imagery to it, more emotion, and sensory input. But can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
Chronologically, does this story take place before, during, or after the Exodus?
It's after the Exodus. So you have the 5 books of Moses, which tell you the story of creation.
But as far as historically, it still comes after. So how does this align? How does this align with the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not murder.
Well, what does murder mean?
So several thoughts have come to my head through this wonderful presentation. We're seeing a public leadership of women, but when you even go back into Genesis with Eve and Sarah and Rebecca, these are 3 women who were the catalyst for major things that happened, even though it was familial as opposed to political or warfare. And it's so interesting how we then go and define leadership, judges, when women have always had this real strong, I'm probably not saying anything that you as rabbinic rabbis haven't studied, but for me, it's any thought, that we're vilified, women are the vilified, the fall of man. And yet, the narrative shifts that in this case is Yael considered heroic, was Deborah considered heroic? Or, I've always, back to, Sarah, I always believe, Rhea taught me this years ago. The angel didn't come down and tell Abraham to knock it off. Sarah followed him up and hid behind a rock and said, put that damn knife down, so I'm just trying to make some sense of this as far as, were the 10 Commandments only meant for the men to follow?
No.
I don't know.
All right. So first of all, let me just give you the chronology. You have the 5 books of Moses, creation to the Israelites on the verge of entering the promised land, right? They don't enter yet. That's where it ends. Then you get the book. That's the Torah. Then you have Nevi'im, the prophets. It starts with the book of Joshua, which is this conquest of the land, followed by the book of Judges, which actually gives the lie to a lot of what Joshua is about, because supposedly cities that were conquered, kings that were killed, blah, 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 are actually still around. So the book of Joshua is sort of the idealized version of conquest. Judges is more like what probably happened, which was some Canaanites joined in and they, formed alliances and whatever. So the book of Joshua is the conquest of the land of Canaan. Judges is this tribal confederacy. And then you get to the book of Samuel, where eventually you get a king. You get Saul and then David. And then the books of Kings are about after David and comes Solomon, then the kingdom splits into two. And mainly, you get in the books of Kings, the history of the South and the North of the kingdoms. And, until, unfortunately, the Babylonian conquest. So I think that, the reason I really wanted to do this class is because I think our understanding of the Bible is overlaid by cultural shaping of what we think and want to think about men and women. And the fact is, if you look at it carefully, it's not what we assume it is. So even just like the story about Adam and Eve, the word sin is never mentioned. And it's never mentioned again later in reference to sin. Like, don't sin the way Adam and Eve did. That never is said. Okay? So that makes you maybe rethink what that story is really about. Is it about maybe we were not mature enough until God gave us the knowledge of good and evil, and then we have to go out and really take care of ourselves in a land that's not so easy to take care of. The way that we understand power, well, maybe some of these women had more power than we thought. Sometimes it's direct power, like in the case of Devorah, she's in charge. Sometimes it's not so much official power, but, for example, Rebecca, who makes sure that her son Jacob is the one to inherit the mantle of leadership for the Israelites and to carry on the covenant with God. She does that by tricking her husband, right? She puts fur on her son's arms so he feels hairy like his brother, and cooks a pot of stew for the father so that, it looks like it's Esau coming in bringing the stew. She doesn't have the official power, but she's able to manipulate things. So it's way more complicated. And then, of course, our understanding as Jews is overlaid by how the rabbis have interpreted over the various hundreds of years. Now, we're interpreting right now, all of us saying, hey, maybe, wait a minute, she's a general. She's not just some little, wife lighting the torches in the temple, right? So it's complicated, right? And that's why, and that's why I always like to ask people, what is the fruit that they ate or didn't eat, in the Garden of Eden? And people will say an apple. There's no apple mentioned there. So that's where all our assumptions come from our culture. But look at the text. May not be I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. Sylvia, she went away.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On that, going back on Yael, that verse 27, where he falls at her feet.
Yeah.
It's repeated several times. And
thank you.
I always been taught when something has been repeated several times, it carries a much more important
Thank you.
meaning.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because one of the things I was going to ask in terms of how this is different from the prose narrative is the rhythm here. Do you see a rhythm, especially in that last verse? He sank down at her feet. He fell and lay there. He sank at her feet. He fell. Where he sank down, there he fell dead. There's a real rhythm to that. And let's see what some people have to say about that. Oh, so we talked a little bit about the whole idea of motherhood, right? That she gave him milk like a mother would, and you think that it's a maternal thing, but obviously it's more, like I think Irene said, that is to get him sleepy. But Miki Ball says this is like an anti-mothering. And she says the poem increases the sexual connotations of the murderous act. The poem subtly suggests that Yael's action is kind of rape. So let's go back to looking at that. I mean, the way it is written, and probably, if we read it in Hebrew, it'd be more obvious. There is a rhythm. She did this, she did this, she did this. Almost, it sort of kind of echoes the hitting of the hammer on the tent peg. Bang, 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 right? And that also is a rhythm that is kind of echoing rape. Bang, bang, bang. So do you see? Because the prose part of it just says she took the tent peg and rammed it through his head. Okay, yeah. But here you get much more of a rhythmic thing. He did this, she did that. She did this, he did that. Da 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 da. He sank, he fell. It's really, really that rhythm. And she says, I mean, and so does Robert Alter, that it's basically like a rape scene. Here's Robert Alter. Robert Alter calls the murder an aggressively phallic assassination. Yael pounds a tent peg into Cicero's head, a violent, penetrating action, which is repeated 3 times. Cicero's fall is also repeated 3 times in staccato rhythm. And as Susan Nijich points out, the words used to convey Cicero's death suggest sexual submission. He falls between her legs. Legs or feet are used in scripture as euphemisms for male or female organs. So it's sort of like she's raping him, which is what you might expect him to do to her. And as a matter of fact, where's my little thing here? So Niditch analyzes the verbs that describe his fall. He bent, he kara, he lay, shahav, bereft of life, ruined or despoiled, shadud. The vast majority of biblical uses of shakav in a sexual context refer to illegitimate relations in rape, incest, ritual impurity, adultery, and so forth. And she concludes, double meanings of sexuality and death emerge in every line. He is at her feet in a pose of defeat and humiliation. He kneels between her legs in sexual pose. Yael herself is the aggressor, the despoiler. So not only is the rhythm such that it's like a really aggressive sexual attack, but the words used are specifically words that are also used in these other kinds of, really, as she says, illegitimate relations, whether it's rape, incest, or adultery.
Suzanne, that is so fascinating. I've heard some of this before, but not really with that kind of that sort of level of sort of exploration and analysis. I'll just say, and what that hits me is I don't often compare Devorah and Yael. I know that they're part of the same story, part of a certain kind of team working towards advancing the interests of Israel in that time, but also like that's not a quality that Devorah is not described that way. It's very interesting how she's sort of in fact, if you look at Yael that way, she's a bastion of ethic and propriety. You know what I'm saying? I've never looked at Devorah through the lens of Yael. Fascinating. Thank you.
Good. No, actually, and then in response to Sheila, again, about murder, the 10 Commandments, this is war. This is not, oh, I don't like you, I'm going to kill you. This is a war. And Sisera is the head of this army, and so you got to kill him.
And yet I'm always, because of my background in teaching, I'm always fascinated by what Shakespeare stole from the Bible, and it's Lady Macbeth, when she says, yet I do fear that thy soul is too full. I do fear thy soul is full of the milk of human kindness. So she's comparing her husband to this feminine quality. And then she goes into her unsex me here, right? And sex me now. She's praying to the gods, take away my womanly attributes and give me the power of the man. And the next thing you know, she's taking the daggers and she goes and then she slays the messengers, the guards,
Right.
King Duncan's guards. And that is also, and when you just said that about, what do they do? What does she do to, ascertain the perseverance of Israel? she believes she's doing it for Scotland. I mean, it's so right there.
Yes,
So I go on a
Sheila.
tangent,
Brilliant.
but
Brilliant.
Yeah. Although Lady
From a,
Macbeth, I think, is pretty
from a
awful.
man's point of view,
Yeah.
the story seems to me that here you have a guy who's on the run, and this woman takes him in. And I think Yael, I don't know what her relationship is to the Hebrew God, but I think right off the bat, she knows who he is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And
She's adjacent. She's Israelite adjacent.
Right. Or light Israelite.
I mean, they're yeah.
So anyway, so let's say if you look at, there's other scenes in the Bible where men are taken into the tent. You got, like Jacob, like he's given water at the well, when he's lost. Even Moses, I think he's taken in. And they feed the kid, So here he's taken in this typical scene, and she is very motherly to him.
Yeah.
And I think she just plays off of it to bring him closer and closer. And I think she just has a job to do. I mean,
absolutely.
And she does her job. I don't know. There might be sexual content there, and that's part. I mean,
it's not. No, I don't think there's sexual content. I think it's the fact that the way she is killing him.
Right. But she knows the motherly content that mothers to son. I mean, she does feed into. There is something where I could see where a man would write this, because he would explain that process that's drawing him in, that he would think is relief.
Absolutely.
So that's my take on it.
No, absolutely. Now I wanted to show you one more thing. This goes back to the song. And remember, Sisera's mother. Okay, so now Sisera's mother is waiting, right? He's gone off to battle, and she's now waiting. She's looking through the lattice, and that happens a lot, that women have to look through a lattice or something. They're not out in the open. They're sort of inside, and they're looking out. And why is his chariot so long in coming? She's worried, right? It's midnight. Where were you all night? I'm worried, right? And why are his horses so slow to return? The wisest of her ladies answer her, and she repeats it to herself. Why is he so late? Of course, they're collecting and dividing the spoil. What do you do when you win a battle, right? You take everything as a spoil. A girl, 2 girls for every warrior. So tell me something. What does that mean? What does it mean, a girl or 2 girls for every warrior?
It's rape. I mean, basically.
Yes, it's rape.
Yeah,
it's rape. So yes, absolutely. That's absolutely it. So the mother is assuming that the reason her son is late in coming back from the battle is that he's out there plundering the spoils and raping a few girls, because that's what you do when when you win. So she's assuming that her son is doing that when in fact he is, in a sort of metaphoric sense, being raped himself. So that's the sort of beautiful.
What is interesting about that verse? What's interesting about that verse? Is, in the Hebrew Bible, there are parts where they talk about if you become a victor in a village, you cannot take a woman for 30 days, and you got to let her sit there. And the whole issue, we live in a society, or we live in countries, even within them, where there's very little rape within our armed services that we have record of. But if you go to other places, like the Russian army, it's quite normal.
Right. So
I just want to say this is an interest aspect of Judaism that we already see right here. That we live in.
Absolutely, you're right. The Code of War says that you should give the woman 30 days to mourn the loss of her husband or whatever, and that's a more sensitive way of handling this sort of thing. You don't just take the woman and rape her. But in other cultures, Sisera's mother is assuming that her son is out there raping, right? And as these two scholars say, women on the losing side can expect to be captured and raped, if not killed. Hence the poetic justice with which Israelite singers depict Sisera's death. Thus, Yael is depicted by Devorah does to Sisera what he would have done to these women, i.e. rape. And Jim, you're right to point out that, at least in theory, that is not permitted by, Israelite soldiers. They have to give women some time to adjust, and then they sort of marry them, right? There wasn't a formal marriage, but they marry them, they don't rape them. So, okay, I'm just trying to move this along because I've got Judith to cover now. And Judith, now, where is the book of Judith? It's in something called the Apocrypha. So originally, when the Hebrew Bible was put together, there were some books that are not included in the final TaNaKh. Now, the original that had all these other books was translated into Greek starting in the 3rd century BCE. And that particular version of the Hebrew Bible is what the Catholics used as their Bible. So the Apocrypha is in the Catholic Bible. It is not in our Bible. Do you know of another book that's in the Apocrypha that's not in our Bible that is kind of surprising? The 2 books of Maccabees. They are not in our Bible. Okay. Now, is it because it was written in Greek? Is it because it encourages rebellion against an empire when the rabbis were living under the Roman Empire and maybe didn't want to emphasize that? Nobody left us any notes. All we can do is speculate. But the book of Judith is in the Apocrypha. So it's not in our Bible, it's in the Catholic Bible. So let's read a bit about her. Oops, let's see, we're going to go on. Oh, I was going to have this discussion, but we don't really have time because I got to do Judith. But this does go to the whole issue, and it's the same questions for Judith. You were asking, well, what about not murdering? Well, is it acceptable to do it this way, where you trick somebody? And would you want women in combat to behave that way as well today? People in the army. So those are things to think about. As I said, we don't really have time to get into it, I don't think. Let's see what happens when we do Judith. Okay, Judith is another one who murders a general. Okay, I guess maybe the rabbis thought one is enough. We had Yael and Devorah. Let's leave it at that and not include the book of Judith. So here's the background. Holofernes is the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian armies of Nebuchadnezzar, which of course is historically problematic because Nebuchadnezzar is a Babylonian, but we're not going to get too crazy about that. And he leads a massive force in a punitive campaign against the Western vassal nations, including Israel. So Holofernes, this is this commander-in-chief, the general, he lays siege to this place called Bethulia, cutting off its water supply. After 34 days, the exhausted Bethulians are ready to surrender, even though it will mean worship of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, does somebody want to read our story? No? Chuck, did you want to read? He's trying to unmute, I think. There you go.
Okay, you want me to read the questions? Yeah.
So, do you see Judith up here?
No.
No?
You're not sharing that.
Oh, that's weird. All right, let me try that again. That's so strange.
I was ready to read, but...
Okay, how's that? Does it say Judith?
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, I don't know why I didn't change.
Judith had lived at home as a widow for 3 years and 4 months. She wore the garments of her widowhood. She fasted all the days of her widowhood. I hope that's not a complete fast. She was beautiful in appearance and had a very lovely face. And her husband, Manasseh, I have something covering it up. Just a minute.
Oh.
Get rid of that. Okay. Manasseh had left, and husband Manasseh had left her gold and silver and men and women slaves and cattle and fields, and she maintained this estate. No one spoke ill of her, for she feared God with great devotion. When Judith heard that Uzziah promised under oath to surrender the city to the Assyrians, she sent her maid to the elders of her city.
Okay, so far what we know about Judith is that she's beautiful, right? As someone said before, a lot of these women are beautiful, and they do use their sexuality, right? Sometimes when they need to. And she is wealthy, and she's somebody who's devoted to God, right? She fears God. She does the fasting she's supposed to do, all of that. And then she finds out that there's this Holofernes has laid siege to the town she's in, and the townspeople are saying, I think it's time to surrender. Do you want to go on, Chuck? Oh, you're muted. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Now I got to wait for the box to disappear. Okay. They came to her, and she said to them, "Listen to me, rulers of the people of Bethulia. What have you said to the people today is not right. You have even sworn and pronounced this oath between God and you, promising to surrender the city to our enemies unless Adonai turns and helps us within so many days." Judith said to them, "Listen to me. I am about to do a thing which will go down through all generations of our descendants."
Okay, we've got a few more slides to go. So here she is saying, hey, wait a second. No, do not do this thing of like giving in, right? So she's going to do something. We don't know what yet. Okay.
Stand at the city gate tonight, and I will go out with my maid, and within the days after which you have promised to surrender the city to our enemies, Adonai will deliver Israel by my hand. Only do not try to find out what I plan, for I will not tell you until I have finished what I am about to do.
Okay, she's got something in mind. We don't know what.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And she removed the sackcloth which she had been wearing, and took off her widow's garments, and bathed her body with water, and anointed herself with precious ointment, and combed her hair, and put on a tiara, and arrayed herself in her gayest apparel, which she used to wear while her husband Manasseh was living. And she put sandals on her feet, and put on her ankles and put on her anklets and bracelets and rings and her earrings and all her ornaments, and made herself very beautiful to entice the eyes of all men who might see her.
Okay, so she's anointing herself, wearing the most beautiful thing. She's going to look really beautiful. Okay. Okay. Do you want to keep reading, or do you want someone else to pick it up?
Your choice.
Go ahead.
There was great excitement in the whole camp, for her arrival was reported from tent to tent, and they came and stood around her as she waited outside the tent of Holofernes, while they told him about her. And they marveled at her beauty, and admired the Israelites, judging them by her. And every one said to his neighbor, "Who can despise these people who have women like this among them? Surely not a man of them had better be left alive, for if we let them go, they will be able to ensnare the whole world." Then Holofernes' companions and all his servants came out and led her into the tent.
So she's so beautiful that even the enemies say, how can we hate these people if they produce these gorgeous women, right? So but we better be careful because these guys are going to ensnare us, right? And they're not wrong.
Holofernes was resting on his bed under a canopy which was woven with purple and gold and emeralds and precious stones. When they told him of her, he came forward to the front of the tent with silver lamps carried before him. And when Judith came into the presence of Holofernes and his servants, they all marveled at the beauty of her face, and she prostrated herself and made obeisance to him, and his slaves raised her up. Then Judith came in and lay down, and Holofernes' heart was ravished with her, and he was moved with great desire to possess her, for he had been waiting for an opportunity to deceive her ever since the first day he saw her.
Great. So he's in some luxurious place. I don't know. They're in the middle of a battle. I don't know how he has this purple and gold and emerald and precious stone canopy over his head, but it's a very luxurious situation. And he's like thrilled to death that she's there because he's had his eye on her for a long time, right? Just got to get my mouse back. Where is it? There it is. Okay.
So Holofernes said to her, "Drink now and be merry with us." Judith said, "I will drink now, my lord, because my life means more to me today than all the days since I was born." Then she took and ate and drank before him what her maid had prepared. And Holofernes was greatly pleased with her and drank a great quantity of wine, much more than he had ever drunk in any one day since he was born.
Okay, so, where Yael gave milk to the guy, this guy's drinking wine and he's, not smart. Okay, 2 more slides.
So Judith was left alone in the tent with Holofernes stretched out on his bed, for he was overcome with wine. So everyone went out, and no one, either small or great, was left in the bedchamber. Then Judith, standing beside his bed, said in her heart, "O Lord God of all might, look in this hour upon the work of my hands for the exaltation of Jerusalem. For now is the time to help thy inheritance and carry out my undertaking for the destruction of the enemies who have risen up against us." She went to the post at the end of the bed above Holofernes' head and took down his sword that hung there.
Okay, so she is speaking to God, which is, a good thing because obviously she's got God on her side. And this is the last slide. Thank you so much for reading all this.
I'm glad she's not using a tent peg.
Yeah, she's using his own sword.
I've been involved with scouting for 40 years, and this is not an appropriate use of a tent peg. So she came close to his bed and took hold of his hair, of the hair of his head, and she struck his neck twice with all her might and severed it from his body. Then she tumbled his body off the bed and pulled down the canopy from the posts. After a moment, she went out and gave Holofernes' head to her maid, who placed it in her food bag. Wait. Then the two of them went out together as they were accustomed to go for prayer, and they passed through the camp.
Thank you so much for reading all this. So that's the whole story. Here she is with the her maid and the head. So interestingly, for some bizarre reason, we already have this problem of, Holofernes being of the wrong, ethnic background. But in some medieval accounts, Judith is associated with the holiday of Hanukkah. And the book of Judith, which is dated to about 100 BCE. So, of course, that's a long time before there's an actual, temple. I mean, there's a second temple there. I'm sorry, the reconsecration. Several decades after the reconsecration of the temple in 164 BCE, combines historical elements taken from many periods, including events and figures from Hasmonean times. For example, General Holofernes, whose death leads to the rout of the enemy, is reminiscent of the Seleucid general Nicanor, whose head is hung in the citadel of Jerusalem by Judah the Maccabee. So, because they're near each other, 100 BCE versus 164, that's only 64 years later, they're thinking, well, maybe she's kind of like a Maccabee. I mean, that's a big compliment, right? To be like the Maccabees. Judah Maccabee is a big hero, and she is a big hero too, and she does the same thing that Judah does, which is to cut off a head. Judith can be seen as a variation on the figure of Judah. She's got a similar name, Judith and Judah. She becomes an actual participant in events surrounding the Hasmonean victories. As you may know, the Hasmoneans, that's the name of the family. Judah Maccabee is one of them. Another reason for the introduction of Judith into Hanukkah tales and customs seems to be the many parallels between Judith and Esther, two beautiful and seductive Jewish heroines who saved their people. So in both cases, as somebody pointed out, yes, women will use their sexual charms if they need to in order to accomplish a particular goal. As you know, Esther also was very beautiful. Excuse me. And she doesn't chop anybody's head off. She tries to save the Jewish people by, starting a party for her husband, which is something that he really likes to do. So in other midrashim, Judith again saves her city and people by going to the enemy camp and beheading the intoxicated foreign leader. But in contrast to the actual book, she's often cast as a more vulnerable and dependent figure, a lesser heroine. At times, she's said to be a young, unmarried woman rather than a wealthy and independent widow. And the medieval Judith is often challenged within her own community. When Judith leaves for the enemy camp, she's stopped by the guards at the city gate, who interrogate her harshly, accusing her of treacherous or promiscuous behavior. So once again, not that the rabbis do this all the time, but they do tend to do this. Take a woman who's strong, who's accomplished something that a man would do with no question, and go, maybe she's not this really powerful woman. Maybe she's just like a, young woman, virgin, whatever. And they're not so sure that she's behaving in such an ethical way. That's one way to, kind of cut the woman to size. Even more unexpected is the cool reception Judith receives upon her return. For the skeptical guards refuse to believe that the head she carries actually belongs to the enemy commander. These medieval versions seem to reflect their author's own era and attitudes. So there's the maid, by the way, with the head in the bread basket. And the guards at the gate are going, maybe she cut somebody else's head off. I'm not sure why she would do that, except that she'd be a very evil woman. But they can't believe that, you really actually killed the general who was laying siege to our town and causing us to have no water. So very clearly from the book, that is not the case, that she's some weak woman who happened to cut off somebody's head that's not the right guy. And Tony Craven says, Judith is conventional in upholding inheritance and purity rites in prayer and fasting and her ideas about God's providence. We saw that, right? She does what she's supposed to do. She's unconventional in upbraiding the male leaders of her town for what they have said about God, though she does this within the privacy of her own home. So she goes to these leaders in the community and says, you cannot do this. You cannot swear to God that you're going to go ahead and surrender. That's very, very, bad. So she has the nerve to confront the male leadership, On the other hand, she doesn't do it publicly, right? She had sent her maid to get these leaders to come to her home so she could tell them in the privacy of her home so she doesn't humiliate them. And you may know that in Judaism, tochacha, which is basically telling somebody they're doing something wrong, it's something you're supposed to do, but you're not supposed to do it in such a way that it humiliates anybody. So you do it privately, and you should also always look to what are my motivations for doing this thing? Why am I going to call this person to account? Is it for my own ego, or am I doing it because it's the right thing? No other woman in the Bible has another woman in charge of her estate. No other childless woman refuses to marry. Those are things we didn't look at because there's a lot more material that we don't have time to look at, but she doesn't want to remarry. She doesn't want to have a kid. And that's even today is a tough thing, right? How many times are women asked, do you have children? And if you don't, it becomes very awkward in the conversation. On her account, no one ever again spread terror among the Israelites during the lifetime of Judith or for a long time after her death. You know, there have been plenty of other battles that happened, but apparently not, at least during her lifetime, that the Israelites were, you know, facing defeat. Okay. I stopped sharing, I believe, right? Is that true?
Oh, there it goes. Now you
There
are.
we go. Okay. Okay, so we just have a few more minutes. Ooh, a lot of people had to leave, I see. So let's just, you know, take the few minutes to talk about, first of all, the question that I didn't think we'd have time to answer, which is, how would you feel if a woman in our army today did something equivalent to what Yael or Judith did? Is it ethical? Is it not ethical?
Kind of, it depends upon how we think about how a male would do the very same thing.
Well,
And there was some very big controversy about that in the Vietnam War, as you might know, about killing a village full of women and children that
right.
clearly men did.
Well, maybe we don't like men doing it either. I don't know. Jim?
Well, all fear and love and war, you know, to a certain
Right.
extent.
Right.
You know, I mean, I think if it's a woman, I mean, I'm not sure under what circumstances we're talking about, like seducing a leader and, you know, killing him. I think probably Israel has done it. I'm sure the Mossad has done stuff like that.
Well, not only the Mossad, right? Matahari, remember her?
Right.
But there are a lot of, yeah.
You know, I think when it comes down to is it okay for women to use their sexuality to attract men? Well, I think it's I don't think it's a evil thing, but it's just a thing that is. Women have this power over men. I'll give you a really clear example where it's not necessarily the women, it's actually the man who has the problem. Yeah, as you were talking about, you know, all these guys doing things to sleep with the woman. It just happened. You know, I was reading a thing about Michael Geffen.
Yeah.
And he's in a big divorce thing right now. He's getting sued for $200 million from his old boyfriend. Okay, he's gay. He admits it. You know,
you mean David Geffen?
David Geffen, sorry.
Yeah.
And you look at David and you say, why would he even get involved with this guy to begin with? What were you expecting to happen? You know, I guess he cut him out of the will. And I said, what did you expect to happen there, David? You know, and and it's no different than if a heterosexual man was being seduced by a woman. Men think that way. And they get into trouble that way.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, I'll give you one more example. In the Bible, there's only one person who's given the title Tzedek. Who is it? The righteous.
The righteous.
Are you thinking of
Melchizedek, the king? Is given the title the righteous after his name.
Isn't it Melchizedek?
Noah is
Joseph.
Ish Tzaddik.
Oh, Ishadik.
Yeah, but it's
because he
it's
resists
Jacob.
he resists Mrs. Potiphar.
Right. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. My first marriage, my wife and I didn't have much in common except for Torah. And we were talking one day about Joseph. It was the parsha of the week. And she was talking, and I said, Joseph is not that great of a character. And she was saying, yeah, but he's given the title the righteous. And I think it's because Potiphar, because of what he did. But that doesn't seem right, just because he refused it. So I happened to go to Shalosh Shittas for Shabbat, for the afternoon sermon, for Torah talk. And I'm talking so I bring up to the rabbi, I said, why is Joseph given the title was he given for not sleeping with Potiphar's wife? He said, yes. So isn't that a really weird thing to give the guy for? He said, well, he's an he was like a pretty liberal Orthodox rabbi. He goes, no. He said, when you really think about it, when you really, really think about it, here he is, in a 19-year-old, 20-year-old boy in the arms of the most beautiful women in Egypt, naked. They're almost completely naked. And for whatever reason, he had the ability to walk away from it. And I said, oh, now I get it.
Okay.
And unless you are a 19-year-old boy or were a 19, you have no idea. I don't think you can understand that.
Okay. Well, thank you for the examples.
Well, just as a back, so when I got home and told my wife, and she was right, she said, oh, what's the big deal? She didn't understand it. And then years and years later, with my second marriage, I happened to tell the story to my wife, and she said, what's the big deal? So I think the big deal is you have to be a 19-year-old boy to really understand some of this stuff.
Right. Okay. No, but you're right. I mean, it's just, we're going to have to sign off because it's after 11, but I just want to say, I don't know if you've seen the series, The Diplomat. No, it's not The Diplomat. I'm sorry. That's a really good series too, but it's Slow Horses.
Right. Yeah.
And there is a whole thing in there where this one guy, Roddy, is being seduced by a lovely young woman, and she's on the other side, and he thinks he really loves her. She really loves him. And she is what is it called when you use a woman, a honey something? I can't remember what they're called. But yeah, so she's also used as a way to lure him in. And he's the guy who's the IT guy. So they get into all the, programming and whatever, and he really, until almost the very end, believes that she's really in love with him. And it is a technique that's used in wars. And, whether the wars are, on the battlefield or, cyber warfare or whatever. So thank you for that, and it's great to see all of you, and I will see you next week.
Okay,
Thank you,
if
Suzanne.
you want to share the
Have
slide
a great
deck,
week. Have a great week.
If you want to share the slide deck, we'll add it to the.
I will do that. I will share the slide deck. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
All right.